To answer your question, what Texas ought to do is determine what the mission is in the state perspective. I think that the mission in education ought to be excellence in literature, math, science, and social science. If school districts want to enrich beyond that, more power to them. But at the state perspective, we ought to hone in on 4 subject matters and see if we can do it right. We ought to determine the cost per pupil necessary to achieve excellence in the classroom, and we ought to fund it. The funding priority of the state of Texas ought to be the school children of our state, and it has not been under the past 4 years. The state share of education has decreased to 44%. That is why we have property taxes on the rise in nearly every single school district in the state of Texas. Define the mission, determine the cost per pupil necessary to achieve the goal, and elect a governor who's willing to say that the #1 funding priority of our state will be the school children of Texas.
Actually, we've increased funding for dealing with nuclear proliferation, about 35% since I've been the president. Secondly, we've set up what's called well, first of all, I agree with my opponent that the biggest threat facing this country is weapons of mass destruction in the hands of a terrorist network. And that's why we've put proliferation as one of the centerpieces of a multi-pronged strategy to make the country safer.
Lay out my juvenile justice plan in a minute and a half is a hard task. I will try to do so. The core of crime in Texas is the juvenile justice problem. I think we ought to try 14-year-olds as adults, down to 14 years old as adults, to help our gang task force members fight crime. I know we need to expand the determinant sentencing statutes in the state of Texas. We need to have boot camps, reform schools, and detention centers. We should expand the Texas Youth Commission by 1,500 beds. We ought to unseal juvenile records so that teachers, educators, and law enforcement officials know full well who they're dealing with. We need to say to our children, we love you. But we understand in Texas that discipline and love go hand in hand.
Our enemies are innovative and resourceful, and so are we. They never stop thinking about new ways to harm our country and our people, and neither do we.